Good morning, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the Summer Readiness 2023 training webinar. My name is Rochelle Weltsius, and I will be taking you through today's training. I also have a few individuals here with me to help present some information to you. First of all, I have Cindy Hinman, Lead Customer Readiness Trainer, who's going to be helping me monitor the chat, watch for background noises, and just in general, make sure we run smoothly today. Craig Williams is also here as our resident subject matter expert and is going to assist me with some of the training and may speak up during question and answer periods to help provide clarity as needed as we discuss some of these topics. Also, I want to remind you that in an effort to increase transparency and provide greater service to our stakeholders, we are recording today's webinar. It will be posted on our website so that you can review it in the future and for anyone that was not able to join today's call. If you'd like to follow along with me in the presentation, this slide deck has been posted on the Learning Center under New Modules and placed under the Summer Readiness 2023 heading. You can also access it by clicking on the link that Cindy has placed in the chat all the way to your right for your convenience. As we progress through the training, I'm going to go ahead and stop for question and answer periods, and we will document any questions that you may have, and we'll go ahead and update the training accordingly. So with that being said, we have a lot to go over today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to review today are just some general housekeeping. So first of all, you're going to want to make sure to keep yourself muted unless you have a question. With so many people on the line, noise can make it difficult to hear the presenter, so we recommend that you keep yourself muted. Secondly, if you have a question, you have two options. You can either ask that question over the phone, or you can go ahead and type that question in the chat. If you do want to ask a question over the phone, you can virtually raise your hand in WebEx using the icon either next to your name or below in the dashboard. So that's how you will indicate to us that you have a question. In today's training, we're going to do quite a few things. The first thing is review the key takeaways from summer 2022. So we're going to look back to last summer, figure out what we learned and what we did to enhance our processes. We're also going to discuss something called the CAISO Emergency Playbook, what it is and what information is listed inside of it. We're going to walk through each of the emergency alert notification levels and what happens during each. We're going to learn the process to subscribe and unsubscribe to those emergency alert notifications. We'll go over that very briefly. And we're going to review the 2022-2023 releases that may have some impacts for you this summer. And lastly, we're going to discuss the resources that you can use to get additional information if you do have questions. So hopping right into key takeaways from summer 2022, the first one is that we have created and will post, it isn't there yet, but it will be soon, a public version of what we're calling the emergency playbook for reference during summer heat events. It really goes over our processes and our communications with regards to these events, and we're going to take a deeper look at that here in just a second. Next, and consistent with the playbook, we've added some forecasted system conditions information or section to our internal systems emergency operations procedures. We also have aimed to improve coordination of CAISO communication roles and responsibilities so that we and everyone that interfaces with the ISO has a better understanding of their role during these events. We've improved look-ahead data and information and system operation tools. And we've also strengthened criteria for the California Flex Alert. We are going to talk in depth about this change, which is clarify the emergency notice language specifically for the CAISO EEA3 or Emergency Alert 3. And then lastly, improve those de-escalation notices so that you know when we are out of that summer heat event. So you'll notice these takeaways are kind of sprinkled through all of the changes that we have made this year. So as promised, the first thing we're going to do today is review that emergency playbook and each of those sections. So the emergency playbook starts with 4 to 7 days out, and we'll see there are 3 different areas that it outlines. Operational assessments and what is being done 4 to 7 days out operationally, coordination with external entities, so that may impact you, and then lastly, the public and customer communications that the ISO is doing. So from 4 to 7 days out, if we have forecasted for a summer heat event, operationally, they're going to monitor demand forecasts, assess RA, system conditions, weather, and other potential grid impacts, and plan for those next steps. With regards to coordinating with external entities, and it really depends on the actual and potential system conditions, outreach and coordination may happen either to the governor's office or those long start strategic reserves resource scheduling coordinators. And lastly, consider the need for the Department of Energy 202C order and whether other governmental agency assistance may be needed. So quite a bit happening on that end. And lastly, from a public perspective, the CAISO may issue a high temperature heads up via our website. That's always a really good place to go. And of course, via Twitter on our social media. So this is what's happening at the 4 to 7 day mark. All right, let's move a little closer to that forecasted heat event, and we're going to look at 1 to 4 days out. So operationally, we're going to continue to review and validate the most current information on those system conditions, again, reassessing resource adequacy, weather forecasts, and any other potential factors that impact the grid. With regards to coordination with external entities, the ISO is going to prepare our customers and our entities for possible conservation efforts so that we can free up some of that additional supply. That's really important. So we're talking about initiating communication to water agencies like CDWR, neighboring balancing authorities, the Emergency Load Reduction Board, or ELRP, other utilities, the reliability coordinator, and any sort of regulatory agencies. We also will coordinate those DOE 202 orders if that's necessary, coordinate emergency supply above the approved permit, and of course, a potential governor's office proclamation of state of emergency or governor's office executive order, depending upon the status of that heat event. And publicly, the ISO may issue a restricted maintenance operation, or RMO. We're going to talk more about those. And it'll be located in quite a few different locations, whether it's through the ISO Today mobile app, which I always recommend that people download, our messaging system, through email, we'll talk more about that, and today's Outlook. And we also publicly post, or the Department of Energy publicly posts those DOA orders, and the governor's office publicly posts the proclamation and order. So that's all of what's happening 1 to 4 days out from that heat event. All right, let's go ahead to move on, moving on to 1 day out. So it's 1 day out before that forecasted heat event. Operationally, they're continuing to review and assess, specifically because now we have those day-ahead market results and the most current information on the actual and potential system conditions. So everything is getting tightened up operationally. With as regards to coordination with external entities, we are continuing to work with our utilities and neighboring balancing authorities, the ELRP board, and of course the reliability coordinator. And lastly, publicly, we may issue, and it's likely that we're going to issue, a flex alert, which we'll go over what those are and what they look like, and an EEA watch notice via a bunch of different ways: the ISO Today mobile app, messaging, email, a news release, daily briefing. I always recommend that people enroll into that as well. And then you'll certainly see our social media updates on Twitter, and then flexalert.org. All right, last but not least, when it comes to the emergency playbook review, we're moving into the actual operating day of that heat event. Operationally, they're going to review actual and potential system conditions and take actions in accordance with the ISO's operating procedures. including which EEA notifications need to go out, which we will review together. With regards to coordination with external entities, we're going to continue all that coordination we were doing the day before with the same groups. And then there will be a lot of public and customer communications around those flex alerts and the EEA watches, all the way EEA 1, 2, and 3, through all the various methods. And then, of course, at the very end there, you see they are responsible for de-escalating or providing the all clear notices as well, operations is. Okay, so this is kind of what you're going to see up to 7 days before the heat event, all the way into the operating day. And as I mentioned, this playbook is getting finalized and will get posted publicly on our KISO.com website. So before I move on and into the energy emergency alerts and the different levels and when we send them, I want to go ahead and pause and see if we have any questions regarding the emergency playbook.
If you have a question, please either raise your hand or put that question in the chat. Okay, I see one question. Steve, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks. Regarding the communication to customers, you had a list there of several different media or forms and methods you could send out. Yes. So, and I'm going back in history, I'm trying to remember, like, is it consistent to say that that a flex alert or notification will be issued on all of these, or will it be some subset of these, just so we can make sure that we have, you know, that if we subscribe to at least one of these, or a couple, that will get the notification rather than having to look at every single one to get that notification?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can tell you that I don't know if I could say that every single one would have the flex alert, but I can tell you that the majority of them will. Specifically, the ISO Today mobile app, I can guarantee you it will show there. On social media, on the daily briefing, we will always submit a news release, and you will see it in today's Outlook, and we will always send emails and on flexalert.org. So the only one I'm not sure about is MNS, and I'm not sure if, Craig, you have an answer for that, but you don't necessarily need to subscribe to all of these. You will see the flex alert on any of the ones I just mentioned.
Okay, thanks, and that's helpful. And I think, I don't know if it was last year or the year prior, you had Twitter on the list also, and there would be some notifications on through that means, and I don't know if that's still the case.
Yeah, absolutely. We do still use Twitter. That's kind of lumped into the social media category, because I think there are some additional social media platforms we use. I know that we also post on Indeed, LinkedIn, and those kinds of things. So Twitter is used, and you will see the flex alert on Twitter. All
right, perfect, thanks. And so, yeah, the biggest thing is, and it sounds like you're doing that, is that at least, like, using the ISO Today mobile app, that at a minimum we get all the notifications through that means. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. You got it.
Okay, I currently don't see any other hands raised. Steve, you can put your hand back down now, unless you have another question. And there are no questions in the chat.
All right, we will go ahead and move on. So this section is going to be the largest of everything I go over today. So we're going to go through quite a few slides. I want to make sure to give you a full overview of our EEAs, and then I will pause for questions here. So first of all, I want to talk about the different levels that you are going to see. So in our emergency alert level pyramid here, flex alerts, restricted maintenance operations, and transmission emergencies also exist. They're not technically part of the EEA family, but we will go over those as well, because those are generally issued before you're going to see the other ones. But so we'll go over those as well. But with regards to kind of the levels you're going to see, it starts at an EEA watch, then it will move to an EEA 1, an EEA 2, and then finally an EEA 3. And we're going to talk more about the EEA3 and how it is kind of split into two different notifications and the purpose for it. In front of you, I have listed the official title of those notifications, but I want to talk to you about specifically what they mean as we get to those sections. I also want to mention that the ISO has made some slight wording changes to each of the EEA notifications for the 2023 summer season. Not enough impact that you're not going to recognize what they are when they come through either the mobile app or email, but you will see some slight changes there. So let's go ahead and hop into each different notification level and what it means. So from a Flex Alert standpoint, what is happening is that there are potential energy shortages or gas curtailments that we assume are going to happen. It's an ongoing grid issue. There's some sort of variable or uncertain temperature forecast, whether that's cloud cover or heat event or something like that. These are ideally issued in the day ahead, one or more days in advance. That's not always the case, but ideally it is. And essentially, this is just public awareness to reduce demand for energy voluntarily during those times. The second type of notification level outside of EEA is a restricted maintenance operation. What's happening here is that there are actual or potential impacts to some sort of transmission operation going on. Craig's going to speak more to the RMOs and what might be happening a little bit later. But essentially what's needed is we ask that organizations reschedule any sort of planned work or keep equipment and resources in service during that time. These are typically given out with advance notice as well, 1+ days if possible. And then lastly, transmission emergency. Craig's going to speak about this as well. From a transmission side, could be system-wise, could be local, and that load management procedure is going to be effective during that time. These are, the difference here is these are issued in real time because the concern is recognized in real time for either the current or the next hour. All right, let's go ahead and pop into the EEA levels and what they represent. So an EEA watch is a day-ahead analysis that is forecasting one or more hours that are energy deficient, which is typically why it's issued a day in advance. You're going to see these issued the day before by 1500 hours or 3 p.m. Pacific time. And it means that all available generation is projected to be in use during that time. Okay. An EEA1 is similar, but in the fact that it's a real-time analysis of this forecasting. And it's the same kind of what it's translating from the reliability coordinator side, that all available generation is in use. And we ask that our customers be prepared for dispatch of those demand response resources. Because it's a real-time analysis, it's issued in real time, ideally hours before, as far in advance as the system ops know. All right, as we move into EEA2, this means that all available UDC or MSS energy is being used. Load management procedures are in effect at this time. We ask for additional bids, incremental dispatch, emergency assistance, and again, all of these ones after are issued in real time as this is a current emergency going on. When we move into EEA3, I want to distinguish that there are two different types of EEA3s. The first one is just labeled EEA3, but essentially what this is an ask to prepare for potential rotating outages. We are doing something called counting armed firm load as non-spin contingency reserves. I know it sounds quite complicated, but essentially what this means is the balancing authority is unable to maintain those contingency reserves, and we're assuming that load interruption or rotating outages is imminent at this point. So these are issued in real time for the current or the next hour. Now, when we get to EEA3 firm load interruption, what this means is that the ISO is actually ordering those rotating outages. So we know we are unable to maintain those reserves, and you will see that the ISO will issue load shed operating instructions or rotating outages via a blast call. So we're going to talk more about that as well. And those are issued in real time with the expectation of response within 10 minutes. So EA3 is split into two pieces. It's important to know the distinguish between those two. So let's go ahead and look at a timeline of how this might actually work, and then I will pause for questions. So D meaning the day of, right? So 7 days to 2 days before that heat event process, the ISO is going to issue a heat wave bulletin news release. As we mentioned in our emergency playbook, we're going to display a 7-day outlook graph on our website with the load forecast and the RA capacity trends. We may issue a restricted maintenance operation notice asking that all of that maintenance being done on those generation, if possible, is canceled or rescheduled. And we're going to coordinate with our water agencies and other balancing authorities on those conditions. As we move into the day before, just to give you a sense of on the emergency playbook and how that coordinates with EEAs, the CAISO may issue or will issue a flex alert notification before or possibly after the day ahead market, and the RMO will get issued if it hasn't already been done before that. Now, our day ahead market results are published at 1300, and let's say that we look at those results and the market is unable to meet that day ahead forecasted load. Then an EEA watch notice will be issued by 1500. Okay, so we run the day ahead market and we realize that there are going to be shortfalls. We're going to issue that EEA watch. We also are going to request that our reliability coordinator, RC West, issues that EEA watch for the next day as well. We're going to send messages regarding the infeasibilities and possible export and wheel curtailments, and then finally communicate with that ELRP board and let them know what's going on. Now, the day of process, as we move into an EEA1, let's say that our system conditions require us to issue that EEA1. We will request that the RC do so as well, and we are in continuous communication with our load-serving entities and neighboring balancing authorities to include those forecasted deficiencies. If there's potential for us counting that firm load as a contingency reserve, then we're going to provide system status update emails to those balancing authorities and LSEs. As we move into a potential EEA2, the CAISO BA actions are going to include dispatch of RDRR resources, all unloaded generation above resource adequacy designation, all available remaining interruptible load is called on, excess contingency reserves, and all available energy from load following MSS is dispatched. And then it allows for us to arrange for emergency assistance at the EEA2 level. Okay, finally, as we move into EEA3, just an overview of this, it allows us to use our firm load as contingency reserves. We will only contact the UDCs or MSS entities capable of interrupting load. And what I mean by interrupting load are those rotating outages within 10 minutes. So this may be needed in an EEA3. However, I want to mention an initial EEA3 is not an instruction to interrupt firm load. That will come in the form of that final EEA3 and a blast phone call. So if you are someone that works for an entity that does manage rotating outages, receiving an EEA3 is not an instruction to do so. In fact, the first EEA3, what essentially it means is we want everyone to prepare for the potential of rotating outages. So the ISO issues a notification titled EEA3, but on social media and on news releases, you're going to see that it indicates EEA3-prepare for possible rotating outages. The title difference is just really due to a limitation with our current operations notification system. We are actually going to be replacing this operation notification system a little bit later in the year, and so you will potentially see a title change at that time. And as I mentioned, as an important reminder, an EEA3 is not operating instructions for firm load removal, so do not act based on this notification. And last but not least, we have that EEA3 firm load interruption, or what I like to call an ordering of rotating outages. So that notice will be issued under the title of firm load interruption, but on social media, news releases, KISO.com, you're going to see EEA3 ordering rotating outages. It is a completely separate notice from the initial EEA3, and it means that the KISO Balancing Authority is no longer able to meet demand and will initiate that firm load shed operating instruction. But that instruction is done via a blast call, not just the notification. Okay, we will continue hourly updates with those entities, and we'll communicate with those customers that are required to do rotating outages. And last but not least, before I pause for questions on this, on these levels, is the restoration or the downgrade from emergency to normal conditions. If load shed was required or rotating outages were required, the ISO will restore firm load as soon as that system condition allows. That the restoration will be determined by the shift manager, by operations, and you'll see the notifications of the downgrade. Downgrade from EEA3 to EEA2, downgrade from EEA2 to EEA1, and then from EEA1 to EEA watch, and finally until every single emergency notification has been canceled. All right, we are going to do a quick walkthrough. I have Craig Williams here from operations, and he's going to show you a little bit in real time how this is going to work, this process will work. But before I hand it over to him, I want to pause and see if anyone has questions before we look at an example.
Michelle, we actually do have a question. First, Dennis, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we have one in the chat as well.
Yes, thank you. This is Dennis Sismet, NCPA. Can we go back to slide 19, please? Yes, so thank you for clarifying and splitting up the different EA3s into one. The first one where we may get a call to just arm firm load to be shed, and then the second EA3 call to actually shed load. That makes it easier and clearer to understand. This slide says that KISO will only call entities capable of interrupting load within 10 minutes. And on that table, NCPA is the fourth entity behind the first three PTOs. NCPA is not a PTO, and we do not have the capability of shedding load within 10 minutes. So I'm assuming based on this slide that CalISO will not call NCPA to arm firm load to be shed. Is that correct?
I'm just going to ask, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt here. I understand, you know, the desire to discuss this, but I think if it's anything involving a specific utility, let's take that offline and have that discussion outside of this forum, please.
Why is that?
It's not appropriate to discuss something as sensitive as this with the others here.
Will you have schedule another training for specifically the UDC MSS entities like you did last year?
Yes, we actually have a training scheduled for those folks next, I want to say it's next Wednesday. So let me reach out to you. If you could send your contact information to Cindy, I will make sure that you are on that call.
Okay, will do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Just to clarify, Dennis, yep, you can go in the chat and choose my name and put your contact information in there. We do have another hand up, and I know there is still a question in the chat. Kyle, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
This is Kyle Novice with the Public Advocate's Office. And sorry to pull this thread, but Dennis actually brings up a bit of an important question here. If in fact a PTO is unable to shed load within 10 minutes, does that imply that they would be exempt from having to contribute to load shedding in the event of rolling outages?
Do you know the answer to that question? Is that something we need to take back on a parking lot?
You know, again, I think that's something we want to take offline because I don't want to make any declarations or accept any declarations on whether or not you're capable of doing that. That is something we need to talk on an operations level, but not publicly. So I apologize. It's just very sensitive, but you know, of course, we shouldn't call on entities that can't do it. Of course, that would make little sense. But we need to have that discussion about whether you can or can't offline.
I guess I understand your reasoning there. Leaving out specific names, does this mean that any entity that is incapable of shedding load within 10 minutes is therefore exempt from having to shed load in the event of rolling outages?
I think it's fair to say if we are expecting an entity can shed load within 10 minutes and they are not capable of that, we need to have that discussion before we get to that point.
So how do we follow up to find out what the results of those discussions are as public stakeholders?
Again, you can contact us, you know, provide your contact information. We'll certainly reach out to you and we'll set something up if you feel we need to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate your, I appreciate everyone's patience with that, but I don't want to, you know, I don't want to have those discussions in a public forum like this.
Okay, we have a question from Steve. You can unmute yourself, and if you've asked your question, you can put your hand down unless you have another question.
Sure, I have two actually. My first question is, for these different stages, will the same notification list that we spoke about earlier, all those methods be used to communicate the change of each of these levels?
I can actually take that one, Steve. A little bit later on in the presentation, I'm going to talk about a document that I have a link for you online, and it will outline in a graph exactly which forums, which notifications will come at. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. Okay,
thanks. And my second question is, on an earlier slide, you had mentioned the day +7 forecast. I think you said it was going to be available on your website on the graph. Just so I'm looking at the right one, are you referring to the 7-day resource adequacy capacity trend chart for the 7-day outlook graph?
Yeah, so display this. I have the slide up here that you're referring to, right?
Yes, the second bullet there. That 7-day outlook graph, is that the same? Am I looking at the right one when it's the 7-day resource adequacy capacity trend?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a question in the chat from Jose Perez. What triggers the LS Strategic Reserve Units, Flex Alert or EEA Watch, or just asking?
Sorry, can you say that one more time, Cindy? Oh, I see. Okay, what triggers the...
Yeah, I think if you go back on the slides, it shows it there where it talks about it.
I'm sorry, Craig, did you want to take that question?
Yeah, go back one more slide. I think it's one more slide back. Or was it earlier where it mentioned the LSSRRs?
Do you know the, I don't have the information offhand. Do you
He
know
said page 6 in the chat, so maybe it's page 6.
I'm sorry. Let's do this. Let's take that one. Let me do a little background research, and we'll take that one on the parking lot, okay? If we don't know right now. I don't want to necessarily go looking through the slides. So, yeah, Jose, let me take that one on the parking lot, okay? All right. Any additional questions, Cindy?
So Kyle, I'm assuming you just still have your hand raised, or if you have another question, please unmute yourself. I think I don't see any other hands raised. I noticed that Jose did say that his question was on page 6, but no other questions in the chat.
Okay. I will look at that on the back end for you, Jose, but in the meantime, we are now going to have Craig walk through a quick example for you guys so you can get a sense of how kind of the process from Flex Alert to EEA3 works.
Now, I know most of you are very aware of how all of this works, but a lot of times there's confusion in the public. So just trying to look at the public eye a little bit more and trying to make it a little simpler to review. I'm just going to go through kind of a walk of what normal operation looks like. Before I do that, Jose, I know we were talking about those LFSRRs just yesterday or the day before. There's only a limited number of them, and I'm not exactly, I didn't want to definitely tell you what the trigger is without taking another look at it first. So that's why we need to get to you offline. But in normal operation for systems, we have available generating capacity. That means we have generators that aren't being used, and we have generators that are being used. What are we using them for? Well, we're carrying reserves that are used for the load going up and down and possible forecast changes. So there's variability in what we're predicting. We're also covering all of the current customer load that's out there or customer demand. And then we're also maintaining reserves for the loss of our biggest unit, just to simplify it. And why is that so important? Because we don't want to risk having a cascading error to 0 or a cascading loss of generation. That frequency that we operate the system at, 60 hertz, requires generation to be met with demand. And if we don't have enough generation, that frequency starts to drop. As that frequency starts to drop, it can get so low that other generating units fall offline. And that's where we refer to the cascade to 0. So of all the important things, it's making sure that we don't lose our reserves for that loss of a bigger unit. That's what we call the contingency reserves. So if you think about it this way, we have to maintain those contingency reserves. That's the most important part to keep the system from blacking out. Now, as we walk through a situation where all of our generating capacity is being used, that's when we would be concerned with issuing the EEA1 alert. All our energy sources are, or by our forecast, we assume they will be used at some time during the day. So we don't have any available generating capacity left. We're using everything, or we're predicting that we're going to use everything we have available to us to maintain our reserves for ups, downs, and forecast changes, our customer load, and then our absolute must be maintained reserves for the loss of our biggest unit, our contingency reserves. The next step would be if we've used all of our available generating capacity, and we're now concerned that we cannot maintain all of the reserves for our ups and downs and forecast changes, then an EEA2 is going to be implemented, because we're going to start using our load reduction programs. Those are all those things that were listed in the slide. These aren't forced, but they're available programs. For instance, your air conditioning, your local utility might have an air conditioning program that will reduce load in these situations. But we're going to implement, or if we're starting to implement those load reduction programs in any of our emergency operating plans to help mitigate that load, we're in an EEA2. So we anticipate that. We see we're going to do that. We're definitely going to take care of that. Okay, so something's happening here. Let's just hold on a second. Let me read the notice here. Are we seeing the slides right? Or am I just advancing the slides?
No, I think, did you want me to advance? We're still on the first slide, Craig. Would you like me to go ahead and move to the next slide?
Okay, I didn't realize I was advancing it on my own. And yes, okay, so we're on the contingency reserves have to be maintained. That's what we talked about earlier. Go ahead and advance to the next one. and then EEA1. We've used all of our available generating capacity. I apologize for the technical change there. I was seeing it different on my screen. And then move to the next slide. And when we have any concerns about possibly maintaining those reserves, or if we're not able to maintain those, we're called an energy deficient utility or an energy deficient entity. We're implementing our load reduction programs and our emergency operating plans. Now, this is where, why will we call an EEA3? Because we must maintain those contingency reserves. If we're not able to carry, or if we don't have enough energy now for the reserves that we're supposed to carry for the ups, downs, and forecast changes, the only thing left is customer load. So next slide. And that's where an EEA3 is anticipated. Again, it's been emphasized that we want to issue or will issue 2 EEA3s, a first step and a second step. The first one is preparing for those possible rotating outages. And again, that means preparation. That means beginning to get the load ready to be be shed, but not doing it initially unless we issue a second EEA3 instructing them to go ahead and shed that firm load or firm load interruption. If you go to the next slide. Now, it was mentioned that we can back off as the situation gets better. Maybe we're going over evening peak, the load starts to drop, or temperatures start to drop, and we cascade back from EEA3 to EEA2 or to EEA1. We don't have to necessarily go 3, 2, 1. We can go 3 to 1. Eventually, though, we have to issue that EEA0, and we terminate all alerts. That means we're back to normal operation. So next slide. And we are maintaining all of the things. We have available generation, we have reserves, both for the ups, downs, and forecast changes. We've maintained our contingency reserves for the loss of the biggest unit, and all of our customer load should be restored. So it's just a graphical way of looking at that and trying to remember very simply why are these alerts and roughly what triggers them. Okay. Next slide. Now, just briefly, I know we've received questions about what's the difference between a transmission emergency and the flex alerts and the EEAs. When we're issuing flex alerts or EEAs, we're talking about energy deficiency within the entire California ISO system. But a transmission emergency may only and typically only affects a particular location. And that location will be based on the transmission lines in the area, the flows or the equipment, and that emergency may be limited to simply that area. Doesn't affect the entire system. So it's entirely possible that we might have one of these alerts, a transmission emergency or an EEA or a flex alert, or we could have both at the same time, but they're referring to slightly different things. I know there's been some confusion on that, and just wanted to help people understand that a transmission emergency isn't the same thing as we're entering into a situation where we can't carry reserves or we can't meet our load. All right, that's all I have. Any questions at this point on either of those subjects? Again, this is just an attempt to simplify it and make it easier to understand, because it's tough to walk away with 5 slides of multiple bullet points in your head.
Greg, I don't see any questions or any hands raised, so you can continue on.
All right, that's it. That's all I have. Back to you, Rochelle.
All right. Thanks so much, Craig. Let's go ahead and move on. We've talked a lot about emergency notifications, and I want to talk a little bit about how to subscribe to them. And Steve, this is the part where I answer your question about how you can receive them or see them. So there is an ISO communications method document on CAISO.com that houses all the information on the ways that we send out these emergency notifications. I have placed a link on the presentation here for you, just in an effort to make it a little bit more convenient. But as you can see, here are our notification methods. with regards to each of the EEAs, Flex Alerts, RMOs that we have talked about today. I think someone asked, if I remember correctly, someone asked me about Twitter. You can see a majority of those notifications will show up on Twitter. There is an actual EA notification distribution list, which I'm going to speak about in just a little bit, how you can get on it or off of it. And you can see all of the notifications are sent that way. As I mentioned, EEA3s will be done via blast call, whether it's to prepare for those rotating outages or to actually implement those rotating outages. So speaking of subscribing and unsubscribing, if you want to be removed from that distribution list, it's probably unlikely anyone here does, as you're interested in these EAs. You can submit a city ticket or a customer ticket requesting to be removed from that distribution list. If you are not currently receiving these notifications and you would like to be added to that distribution list, we recommend that you submit a ticket with the title EA Request for Addition in the subject field. That way our customer representatives know exactly what you're asking for. You can do that through City if you have access to City, and if you do not, you can go to the Contact Us page on kaiso.com to submit the request there. I do want to mention to remember to check your junk or trash folders. If for some reason you think that you are subscribed and you are not receiving those notification emails, it may end up in one of those folders. Last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about some summer impacting enhancements. I sent you guys the link to download this presentation because for your convenience, I've hyperlinked a lot of these locations so that you don't have to go digging around on kaiso.com. So some releases that have happened in the past year that I would recommend that you go back and review that may impact summer readiness. The first one is our Transmission Service Market Scheduling Priorities, Phase 1. It reviews supporting those export resources and kind of high priority versus low priority resources and how those are being treated. And I have linked the slide deck and the training video here for you as well. Secondly, I recommend that you review, if you're interested, our RDRR bidding enhancements. Both Track 1 and Track 2 were trained, I believe, summer or fall of last year, and you can find the slide deck and the training video with the links here. Also, we've had some questions as we've moved into summer about demand response, specifically within our WEIM marketplace or the balancing authority areas for WEIM. And so you can find information on this either in our WEIM BPM or through the slide deck for a training that we did on this with the WEIM entities. One note, that is posted on our WEIM portal, so you'll need to have access to that in order to access that slide deck. And lastly, there have been some major enhancements to our Today's Outlook webpage. We've done some training on this as well back in 2022 in preparation for summer. There's the video for you to review the enhancements that we have made. In addition to some data transparency improvements, there was actually not a training done on this. We just sent out a readiness note, and I recommend that you review that readiness note if you're interested in that data transparency change. One additional resource I want to chat with you guys is about our 2023 Summer Load and Resources Assessment. It is located on kaiso.com. There was a joint agency media briefing, I believe it was yesterday actually, and is listed on kaiso.com, and I've linked it there for you as well. So if you're interested in what the load and resource assessment looks like for the coming year, you can find that information here. And we actually put out a blog on it as well. It has a really great overview of the assessment if you're looking at kind of trying to understand better what it means, and an executive summary as it would be of this assessment. And last but not least, for additional resources, if you are in the operations sector, you can review NERC standards at the links I've listed here, our reliability coordinator procedures, and then the ISO BA procedures around system emergencies at the links below. So with that, I want to pause and see if there are any final questions regarding the summer 2023 readiness, any of the slight changes that we talked about today, or the additional resources I have discussed with you.
Hey, Rochelle, there are a couple hands raised. I did want to go back to the question that was in the chat and your response, just in case folks weren't looking at the chat. You had asked, somebody asked what triggers the LS Strategic Reserve, and you responded, the LS SRR-SCs are contacted 4 to 7 days out as part of the emergency playbook, not the EEA process. So there are no EEA triggers for this action and will likely happen before any EA is sent out. There are 2 hands raised. First, we'll go to Dan. Dan, would you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. I had 2 questions, but then the answer that was just given raised another one. So around those strategic reserves, will the entire market be notified when that has been enacted, or is that communication only going to those resources?
I believe, unless Craig or Ginger, you know, I believe it only goes to those resources, but if Craig and Ginger do not know, we can take that back as a parking lot question. Do you guys have any additional information other than that?
Those resources are typically out of market a lot of times when called on. So I think your answer is correct, but we should follow up just to be certain.
Yeah, thanks. It's always good for the market to have information when supply is needed. So just note that. The second question is around some functionality that's going into place, I believe now on July 1st, changes from the resource efficiency enhancements, one of which are some tagging requirements for exports. But the one I was curious about is the emergency energy assistance option within the resource efficiency framework. Has the CAISO made a decision whether its BA will be electing to receive or be a part of that program for summer 2023?
I'm unaware whether we've made that decision, or do you know, Rochelle?
I do not actually, and so we'll take that back as well. I know that that's kind of out of scope for this training, but let me see if I can get you an answer. Okay,
that would be great to know as well. And then similarly, or kind of in a similar vein, one of the summer readiness enhancements, I think from 2021 that was carried forward last year, is the incentives for imports during tight system conditions, which are the make-whole payments that are given to HASP hourly block import awards when the FMM or RTD settles below that point. It's identified as that happening during very tight system conditions, and the example is given that it's when CAISO has issued an alert by 3 p.m. or a warning or emergency notice. Is there any additional clarity that you can provide, or could you do some follow-up to provide some clarity on what exactly qualifies for that and how the communication will happen?
Great question for settlement.
Sorry, sorry, Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's really a settlements question that I'm not qualified to answer.
Yeah, we'll take that back as well.
It's a settlements question, but it's also communicating to the market and to market participants. So it would be great to have some clarity on that and have that included within the table of actions that happen under the different steps as you're going through the warnings and then into the EEA watch and the EEA levels. So appreciate the follow-up. Thanks.
Yeah, you got it.
Dennis, you also had your hand raised. Could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, I actually have 2 questions. The first one, it's kind of related to what was just answered regarding when, if there's an LAC that is has the capability of going to backup generation on a retail load, Should that entity be do that during an EEA1 or an EEA2 or EEA3?
Dennis, let me just ask, would the entity be doing that on, is it them that would be ordering that or us? Or are you considering maybe both situations?
It would be the entity, the LSE.
Okay. I think that I can't say for certain when that would happen, but I would think that if you were making an effort to reduce load, that could qualify in the EA2 effort as well.
Okay, great.
Right.
Thank you.
If it's a program and it's not being forced, then it probably belongs in the EEA2 level.
Yeah, I believe it's part of that state special program that was set up last year.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's if it's a program, typically it would be an EEA2 region or an EEA2 thing. With the state's special programs, it's sometimes hard to tell.
Okay. Thanks, Craig. And my last question is, can a transmission operator such as PG&E call an entity and give an operating instruction to shed firm load?
Are they one of you? Are we assuming that they're one of PG&E's UDCs or MSF?
I believe so.
I would believe that would be the proper way for that to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we do have some comments in the chat. First, Tricia Blevins wanted to get a copy of the presentation, which I sent her a link to that. Followed by Mike K, who asks, will CISO procedure 4420 be updated soon? The last update online is 5/1 of 2022. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I know, Craig, I see you nodding there. I believe that they're finishing up the edits to it as a result of the changes that they are making for summer 2023, and it should be updated here shortly. Anything else to add to that, Craig?
No, I was just going to say it should be posted in very, very short time.
Yes.
All right. Tricia also notes that there's a working group on changes to SRR units. Making the units available to the market earlier in the process is on the table. That's followed by Tony Allen of AES Clean Energy. For the maintenance restriction issuance, is there any threshold for generation being made unavailable that we need to meet for that to apply? In solar, we often have techs request to bring down an inverter for an hour or so to then restore an inverter that shares a pad transformer, doubling generation from that pad. Is there any amount of generation exempt from these maintenance restrictions?
So I think it's fair to say that the RMOs are blanket instructions. And if an entity or a scheduling coordinator for a generator has a specific request to make an exception or to do something temporarily, that would be coordinated in real time.
Hey, Tony, does that answer your question? I also see, Dan, you still have your hand raised. Do you still have another question? No. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, and I think we've covered everything in the chat. So I'll hand it back to you, Rochelle.
All right. Thank you so much, Cindy. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, these slides are posted on our Learning Center on CAISO.com in case you would like to review them. And in a few days, I will be posting the recording of this session there as well, in case you or someone from your organization would like to listen to it. You will also soon receive an email with a link to fill out a training evaluation. We really encourage you to take a few moments to fill out this survey. We want to continue to improve your training experience. With that, this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for your participation. We really hope you found it useful and informative. Have a great day.